General Mark Milley, the current chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, is about to step down and he'll retire from military service. He spent about a little bit more than 4 decades in the Army, and then his last position was obviously as the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, which has been a very tumultuous 4 years for him. General Milley also ushered the U.S. out of its 20-year war in Afghanistan. Even though he didn't support leaving Afghanistan, he is still an advisor to the president and carries out the president's orders. And since then, General Milley has been leading the department's effort along with Secretary Austin in their response to Russia's invasion of Ukraine, which is going on 20 months now. In his place comes General Charles Q. Brown, who was the Chief of Staff of the Air Force and also has a very praiseworthy career in the Air Force in particular, and he will take the helm this weekend to serve his own 4-year term now.
Welcome to Reporter's Notebook, where we talk to the Washington Examiner's top journalists about the stories breaking on their beats. I'm Jim Antle. I'm joined today by defense reporter Mike Brest. Mike, there's a period of transition happening on the Joint Chiefs of Staff. Talk about a very important retirement and replacement that's coming up.
Later this week, General Mark Milley, the current chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, is about to step down and he'll retire from military service. He spent about a little bit more than 4 decades in the Army, and then his last position was obviously as the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, which has been a very tumultuous 4 years for him. He was nominated by President Trump, who went against the recommendation of his then Secretary of Defense to nominate Milley. Milley then, ultimately became somewhat of a foil to the former president, both during the end of his administration as well as since then. General Milley also, ushered the U.S. out of its 20-year war in Afghanistan. Even though he didn't support leaving Afghanistan, he is still an advisor to the president and carries out the president's orders. So President Biden, went against advisement, pulled the troops out, and then since then, General Milley has been leading the department's effort along with Secretary Austin in their response to Russia's invasion of Ukraine, which is going on 20 months now. In his place comes General Charles Q. Brown, who was the Chief of Staff of the Air Force and also has a very, praiseworthy career in the Air Force in particular, and he will take the helm this weekend to serve his own 4-year term now.
So in terms of getting General Brown confirmed and getting some other important people confirmed, it's really brought into sort of clearer view Senator Tommy Tuberville's holds on military promotions and confirmations. Where do things stand right now with that?
As of right now, the Department of Defense updated reporters this week that the number of military promotions and nominations that are on hold as a result of Senator Tuberville is up to 371. Now, there were, as we mentioned, General Brown, who was confirmed, as were 2 other top military leaders last week, but at the same time, there are 371 now who are currently being held up. We saw the Senate go through the process of confirming General Brown and 2 others last week in a maneuver that Senator Tuberville sought himself, but at the same time, Democrats said they wanted to do as well and were, celebrating it as well. And to go into their sort of back and forth, Senator Tuberville has held up military promotion since February over the Pentagon's abortion policy that they put in place following the reversal of Roe v. Wade. It was really the Pentagon's first response in how to operate in the post-Roe world. And so they determined that they would provide not the payment for an abortion itself or any non-covered reproductive health care procedure, but they would provide the cost for the transportation, to travel out of state if a service member or a dependent was forced to go out of state to get a procedure because of the local laws of where they're stationed. DOD would reimburse them for the travel costs. Now, Senator Tuberville and a number of other Republicans have been critical of the policy, and Senator Tuberville has argued that the department overstepped its authority to put it in place. Now, we've seen the Department of Justice as well as the Government Accountability Office say that that wasn't true, but Senator Tuberville does not seem like he's backing down anytime soon. DOD doesn't seem like they're changing their policy anytime soon. So it's still up in the air what will happen with these 371 promotions or nominations, but a lot of them, or most of them, are not these high-level senior defense officials, but are people who have families who are unsure of whether or not they'll need to move across the country, figure out schooling. These are a lot of families that are impacted by this hold.
So there's also been a split among Republican lawmakers over aid to Ukraine, and there's been a push among some Republicans to not include aid to Ukraine in the defense funding bill. And we've seen some of these disputes sort of play out in the Republican presidential debates, where the candidates running for president in 2024 on the Republican side take differing views of what the U.S. role in the war between Russia and Ukraine should be. Talk a little bit about that dynamic.
It's a very interesting dynamic to see out play over time, and it's oftentimes unclear whether or not the loud vocal part of the party that's against aiding Ukraine or continuing aid to Ukraine is a small minority, or a slightly larger minority, or even a majority within the party, because there's so many different voices and so many different opinions. That being said, there is this caucus of hardline conservatives who aren't interested in aiding Ukraine anymore, and some have even gone as far to say they would be willing to let the government shut down over this issue of continuing to provide money to Ukraine. We saw during the second presidential debate a split amongst candidates. Right. We saw more traditional conservatives like former Governor Nikki Haley, former Vice President Mike Pence, former New Jersey Governor Chris Christie, all come out and talk about the significance to U.S. national security to continue aiding Ukraine. They talked about how weakening Russia's military without U.S. troops on the ground is a good thing. But then we also saw a divide on the stage. We saw Governor Ron DeSantis and businessman Vivek Ramaswamy talk about how it's not a priority. Both of them mentioned that a bigger priority is fixing what they call issues at the southern border, right. And Governor DeSantis in particular talked about using the military to fight gangs and secure the border. So it really was a pretty stark divide on that stage, and we're seeing that divide also play out on Capitol Hill.
So you mentioned that on Capitol Hill, it seems to be a minority position among Republicans to be skeptical of Ukraine aid, although perhaps a growing number of people, but still not the majority. But on the presidential side, if you add up former President Donald Trump, Florida Governor Ron DeSantis, businessman Vivek Ramaswamy, they're getting a whole lot more votes than the other candidates, even if maybe a greater number of candidates want to keep the aid up, no?
Absolutely. That's a very astute point to talk about how when you look at the polls of who the next GOP presidential nominee will be, the most likely probability is that individual will not support continuing aid to Ukraine. And then it becomes an issue for a general election where a vote for Biden would be a vote for continuing aid, and a vote for whoever the Republican nominee isn't.
Thank you, Mike. You can read Mike and the rest of our national security team's coverage at washingtonexaminer.com.